And welcome to the Aaron Katzman Show. I'm your host, Aaron Katzman. We're here to speak to you about your life, your money, and your investments. If you got any questions or comments, feel free to email me at Aaron, A-A-R-O-N, at lighthouse with an L, lighthousecapital.co.il. That's Aaron at lighthousecapital.co.il. You can check me out on the web at www.aaronkatzman.com. That's www.aaronkatzman.com. Be sure to follow me on both LinkedIn and Twitter and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So we've got a great show ahead, especially for anybody who's either thinking about, has recently made, or has been in Israel for a long time, but made Aliyah. And that's trying to make sense of the whole pension scheme. And it's my pleasure to introduce Gadi Last, who made Aliyah from London in 2007, has worked in finance and investments for over 17 years, both in Israel and overseas. He is owner of the IAL Group, which provides consultancy and brokerage services in English for Israeli investments, insurance, and pensions. Gadi, welcome to the show.
Hi, great to be here, Aaron. Thanks for having me. Thank
you very much. Let's jump right in. Okay, there's a lot of confusion for olim. Like I said, people who have just come, people who've been here for 25 years, right? They still don't exactly get, because it's a little bit complicated. Can we do like a little crash course on sort of making sense of the different policies, the different schemes that are out there, like the Keren Histalmut, the Kupat Gemmel, and the Bituach Menahalim?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, it's not only olim who have a problem with this stuff. It's Israelis who've lived there their whole life. You know, a huge amount of people don't really understand how the whole system works, what they have, is it any good? And it's a shame, because I always tell people, you know, these pension, retirement, Histalmut, you know, plans are often a very large part of people's investment portfolio, retirement planning, and it's almost crazy to think that people don't take a second look at it. And the reason they don't take a second look is it's just confusing. There's a lot of jargon, and so what I'll try and do now in the next 2 minutes is break down some of the more common or more important things for people to understand, so that at least people have a good starting point.
That'd be great.
I mean, I'll split it into two. I'll start off by splitting it into two. There's kind of the pension side of things. Pension, you know, you work as an employee, or even if you're a freelancer now in Israel, you have to put money aside to pension. That's money you can't really touch without paying a big fine until you retire. Okay, and I'll break that down into subcategories in a second. And then there's also things like Keren Histalmut, which is another popular thing to talk about, which is kind of a provident fund. It's not something which everybody has to have. If you have it, it's great. Okay, and it's not. You can use it for retirement, but that's kind of more a good medium-term savings plan, so which I'll get back to in a second. But if we go back to pensions, in Israel, there are basically 3 types of vehicle you can use to save your pension. Okay, and the confusion often is that people, including brokers sometimes, just use the terms interchangeably. Okay, but basically there's 3. There's what's called a Keren Pensia, which if you loosely translated is a pension fund. There's a Bituach Menahalim, which is, I won't even loosely translate it because it doesn't even make any sense. Okay, and there's number 3 is a Kupat Gemmel. Okay, those are 3 different vehicles, and anyone in Israel can choose any of these vehicles to use to save for their pension fund. I think it's beyond the scope of I don't want to bore you and your listeners by going through all of the differences, but in a very brief, small nutshell, a pension fund, the Keren Pensia, which is the most popular vehicle that people use, and to a certain extent, the Bituach Menahalim, are basically made up of mostly retirement savings. So your company will put in X amount every month to your scheme. Most of that is saved and invested for your retirement. A small amount of that is used to buy yourself insurance, kind of life insurance, a kind of income replacement insurance. Okay, those are also inbuilt as part of most Israeli pension funds, which is I think it's quite unique. So it's something which, when people first find that out, it's kind of like, oh, really? I didn't know that. Okay, so that's kind of one of the more important things to take away from there. A Kupat Gemmel, which is the 3rd option I mentioned, is pure savings. Okay, there's no insurance in there at all. That's why most people, unless let's say people come to make Aliyah and they're already kind of close to retirement age, but they're starting to work, or they have, you know, a bad medical history, which means the insurance parts of the pension are going to be difficult for them. You know, then they'll go for a Kupat Gemmel. But most Israeli pension savers use either a Keren Pensia, a pension fund, or a Bituach Menahalim.
Okay, and so those things, just to interrupt for 1 second, those things, once you hit the retirement age, which is different for both men and women, will then pay you, a fixed rate sort of annuity almost, right, every month. You're gonna get what's called a kitzvah, right? You're gonna get something every month.
Correct. I mean, pretty much, you're saving every month, and over the years, you turn 67 if you're a man, or currently 62 if you're a woman, although that's finally potentially going up the retirement age for women. You come to the pension fund, you say, hey, I'm 67, I'm 62, I want to retire. This is what I've saved up. How much are you going to give me every month? And they basically do a calculation largely based on, life expectancy at that time. And they'll give you an amount. It doesn't stay fixed every month. It can change based on investment performance and inflation, but it's broadly it broadly stays similar. And that's what you get every month for the rest of your life. If God forbid something happens to you quickly after you retire, then again, one of the choices you make when you retire is you can have in place so that your spouse, your survivor, then takes over and gets the pension. There are various options to think about when it comes to retirement. But yeah, you're correct. In Israel right now, the only option is to get a monthly annuity when you retire.
Okay. Now, can we transition over to the Keren Histalmut?
Yeah. So Keren Histalmut is I always tell people pension is a duty of the employer to pay you if you're working in Israel. A Keren Histalmut is a perk. They don't have to. Some companies do, some companies don't. It's a very tax efficient vehicle, meaning you get tax benefits for the money you put in, and anything that is in there, like in a pension, grows tax free. Okay, the only real limitation is that you have to wait 6 years from when it first begins in order to take out the money. I mean, again, you can take out the money before, you'll just pay a fine. But if you don't want to pay a fine or any tax, you wait for the 6-year clock to finish. And after that, the fund becomes liquid. And at any point, you can keep it in you can and should keep the money in there. And at some point, whenever you come to withdraw the money, it's all tax-free and all liquid.
Okay. You don't, you don't have to do it. The Israelis do. And at the 6-year date, run to duty free and spend all the money. You don't have to do that.
On the contrary, you absolutely shouldn't. And what I tell people as well, look, sometimes people need cash, you know what I mean?
Right.
If you can afford the monthly repayments, which aren't normally very high, because it's so tax efficient, this Keren Histalmut, and so flexible, try and take a loan against it. The companies who provide Keren Histalmut, which are your insurance companies, your big asset management companies, they all provide Keren Histalmut like they provide pensions. Most of them will give you a really cheap loan against it so that you can continue to invest the money and hopefully have it grow tax-free. They have a very cheap loan which you pay out over time, and then you don't have to take the money out, because once you take the money out, if you then come into some money and want to put the money back in, you can't do that. So what you've taken out, you've taken out. You can put in new money, but if you've taken out a big chunk of money, because you're limited as to how much you can put in every month, if you've taken out a big chunk, the last 5 or 10 years of savings, you can't then put a big chunk back into your Keren Histalmut. So that's another bit of advice I often will give people where it's relevant is don't take out the money, but borrow against it.
Okay. I was remiss, Gadi, how can people get in touch with you?
Oh, well, first of all, we have a website, www.israelatLast.com. I'm happy to, we have a Facebook page, we have a LinkedIn page. I'm happy, you tell me, I'm happy to give out my email address, which is Gadi, Gadi, at israelatLast.com, ISRAELATLAST.com. Or you can call the office number, it's on the website.
Perfect. We'll put your contact information also up in the notes on the show so people can see it there also. You are tuning into the Aaron Katzman Show. I'm your host, Aaron Katzman. We speak about your money, your life, and your investments. If you got any questions or comments, feel free to email me at Aaron, AARON, @lighthousecapital.co.il. Be sure to check me out on the web at www.aaronkatzman.com. Follow us on both LinkedIn and Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're talking Israeli pensions with Gadi Last, who is a consultant with and CEO and founder of IAL, the consultancy group. We sort of gave a quick overview on the different kinds of pension schemes, whether it's Keren Histalmut, Kupat Gemmel, Keren Pensia, which is a pension fund. Now I'd like to get into a little bit more of the nuts and the bolts, not in terms of the minutia, but what viewers should look for what employees or people who own these books should look for so that they can have a much more, let's say, secure future, and things that you would help them with in order to ensure that, right? Could you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. And it's very important, and I really hope that as many people hear this as possible, actually take note, especially if you're about to start your working career in Israel. Because I'll tell you what happens typically. People move to Israel, they get their first job. Okay, the company they're with sends in, Yossi or Doron or whatever, the broker they work with to the office, who barely speaks any English, isn't really getting paid much for the meeting, and his one goal is to get in and get out signed as quickly as possible, with explaining as little as possible. And I mean, I see this all the time, and it's whatever, no use crying over spilled milk, as they say, but they don't really pay much attention to the age of the person who's joining the pension fund, their risk profile, their marriage, their family situation, etc., etc. And so what I would say is the two most important things to think about are as follows. Okay, I'll start with the less important one, because it's one that I'm sure you already think about and you hear people talking about all the time, is the fees. There's two fees when it comes to your pension fund. Again, Keren Histalmut, I'm going to leave separately. There's only one fee, an annual management fee. But with a pension fund, any of the three types of vehicles that I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, there's two fees. There's a fee every month when you put in money. So, for example, you put in, your company sends 2,000 shekel across to your pension fund every month. There's a percentage which comes off that 2,000 shekel every month. And again, depending on your plan and how good your fees are, it can be anywhere between, usually is anywhere between 3% and 1.5%. Okay, so that's fee number one, which is quite a chunky fee.
And that's just for the deposit into the account.
Correct. Correct. It can be higher than that as well, by the way. It's just like, always make sure you when you get your annual report, have a look just to make sure they haven't raised your fees without you knowing. But that's fee number one. And fee number two is the annual management fee, okay, which people are more used to. And there is actually relatively low for Israeli pension schemes. It should range between 0.5% in the Bituach Menahalim to potentially as low as 0.05% in certain pension funds. Okay, wow. But those are the two fees. So fees are obviously important. The less fees you pay, the more money goes into your retirement fund, the more money you have to retire on. It's a simple equation. So that's point number one. And to be fair, most kind of even the corporate pension brokers who don't want to spend any time with you, they're normally going to give you lower fees. I'll also say, kind of open brackets, as someone who's in the industry, nowadays in Israel, brokers don't make more money by you paying higher fees. It used to be that way a few years ago. So it's not in anyone's interest for you to pay more, except for the pension company's interest. But for the broker, there's no interest to having higher fees. So that's number one. Negotiate. The different companies will be more flexible on fees, etc., etc. That's and by the way, before I carry on, it's important to know one of the nice things about the Israeli pension system is that you can move to a different provider whenever you want, however many times you want. You're not locked in. There's no, you're not stuck anywhere. You can always move if someone's offering lower fees, if there are certain conditions or performance, which I'm about to talk about now, is better. You can always move. Okay. The second and far more important thing, which is something which does not get spoken about too much, is the performance. Okay, one of the most pension people in Israel are not investment people, and therefore it's not part of the conversation. How old are you? What's your risk profile? But you have a choice as to how you invest your pension money. There's a default, by law, there's a default track, which is what the majority of people are in, okay, which is an age-related track, meaning until you reach the age of 50, you're invested the same as everyone 50 and below, okay, which is right now tends to be around 40-45% in stocks. So if you're 25, 30 and your money, and let's say you're a man and this money's locked up till you're 67, or if you're a woman until 62, and we're talking about money locked up for 30, 20, 30, even more years, it might be, again, depends on the person, it might be a little bit low risk for them. But you can go higher risk, you can go low risk, you have a choice. And no one has a crystal ball, and no one knows what's going to be in the future. But based on how things have gone the last 100 years, you tend to get more return in the long term, more growth, the more risk you take on. And if someone If it's money that you need for a property in 2 years, I'm sure, Aaron, you'll agree, you don't want to take very much risk. But if it's money that's locked up, and even if you wanted to, you can't do anything about it. Even if there's the biggest stock market crash in the world, you can't take the money out, right? Without paying a huge fee. So the money's locked in. It often usually makes sense for people who have a long time to go on their pension to take on more risk. And this is far more than the fees. This is the one biggest thing that you can do to improve your retirement payout. If you're saving for 20, 30 years and you're making an extra 1% a year, let's say, because you moved to a higher risk track, that could be thousands and thousands of shekel a month difference every month when you retire. And this is unfortunately something which is it's just not discussed almost by almost anyone. So if you are watching this and you are about to take a job, or you're taking a new job, or you want to think about your pension properly for the first time, the first thing to look at is how your money is invested. Okay, you don't have huge amounts of flexibility. You can't say, I want 35% in US shares and 10% in Japanese shares and 5% in Bitcoin. You don't have that level of sophistication of choice. But there are each pension fund has 6 or 7 different investment tracks. Just make sure you're invested in the one that's most suitable for you. That is that if you take anything away from today, that should be it.
And it's also important for employees. Again, you touched on this, but when you go in, chances are there's one firm has a deal with the company, right? You don't have to go with that company. And there are plenty of, there are some smaller companies and more agile companies. There's a whole world of pension out there. You're not stuck in sort of the default that your company offers. It's really important to know.
Absolutely right. That means it used to be like that, but the law changed, I think 4 or 5 years ago. Don't quote me on the number, but yeah, you absolutely have total flexibility as to who you use for your pension. Look, I will say sometimes these companies which have deals with your employer, sometimes you get a good deal on the fees by using that company, and that is something to take into account.
Sure.
But you don't have to. And often, as I said, but specifically because for English speakers, most of these guys don't speak English, and they're not going to give you the personal service that you might want. You can look around and shop around.
Wow. Gadi, once again, how can people get in touch with you?
So either you can send me an email directly to my email address. It's Gadi, Gadi, at Israel at Last, ISRAELATLAST, just rolls off the tongue, .com. And I'm happy to give you my direct number as well, which you can put in the comments. You can check out our website, israelatlast.com, our Facebook page, our LinkedIn page. Anyone who has any questions which arising from the discussion today, please feel free to drop me a line. I'll be more than happy to help.
That was great, Gadi. Thanks so much for joining. I bet I can almost guarantee that we're going to get you on again, because that was really good.
Pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. And kol hakavod for the amazing work you do for the English speakers here in Israel.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. You have been tuning into the Aaron Katzman Show. If you've got any questions or comments, feel free to email me at aaron@lighthousecapital.co.il. Check me out on the web at www.aaronkatzman.com. Be sure to follow us on both Twitter and LinkedIn, and subscribe to our brand new YouTube channel. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.